Welcome, everyone. My name is Carol Watts, and I'm the president of the League of Women Voters of San Jose, Santa Clara. I want to welcome all of you to our Lunch with League, which we normally hold every third Thursday of each month. Today, we're really happy to have Russell Hancock, who's the president and CEO of Joint Venture Silicon Valley. But before I introduce him, I'd like to welcome any new attendees to our virtual luncheon today. We're very pleased you're here. We will invite you to join us at about 1 p.m. in a meeting type format so we can just chat and see each other too. Not the same as being in person, but next best, we think. A few announcements first. On Saturday, June the 5th, we had our annual business meeting where we approved an update to our position on San Jose governance. This was the last event for the study. And let me get the video on. And this was the last event for this our study process, which began in October. And again, we're going to give a big thanks to Vicki Alexander, Virginia Holtz, and the rest of the committee. So now we can use that position and advocate. We have two upcoming events I would like to tell you about. Next Wednesday, June 23rd at 1:30, we're very pleased to partner with San Jose Spotlight with a Zoom interview with the new San Jose Chief of Police, Anthony Mata. You will remember them from our last month Lunch with League. Then on Saturday, June 25th, join others in our county for a civil discussion about healthcare. How can we bring costs down while getting the care that we need? Find out more about these events and register for them on our website at lwvsjsc.org. Today, one of our members, Barbara Marshman, whom many of you probably remember as the past editor of the editorial pages in the San Jose Mercury News. She will help to host our event. Hi, Barbara. And she will be asking the questions that you entered when you registered. Or you can enter your questions into chat for Russell, and Barbara will ask them for you. If you would prefer to ask a question yourself, you may certainly do so. So thank you, Barbara. We'll see you later. Okay, today we're so pleased to have Russell Hancock with us. He is the president and the CEO of Joint Venture Silicon Valley and has been since 2003. Hi, Russell.
Hi, good morning.
Yes, good morning. Joint Venture provides analysis and action on issues affecting the Silicon Valley economy and quality of life. He is also the founder of the annual State of the Valley Conference, which is a town hall meeting of local leaders to discuss the Valley's challenges and opportunities. The conference features the release of Joint Venture Silicon Valley Index, which Russell will summarize for us today. He is credited with the growth and increasing influence of the organization to the point where today, Joint Venture is Silicon Valley's recognized clearinghouse for regional analysis and for collaborative approaches to solving the region's problems. The Joint Venture model is now being replicated in various metropolitan regions throughout the United States, Europe, and Asia. Also, he is fluent in Japanese, and he's a concert pianist. Russell Hancock, welcome.
Thank you. That is a lovely and gracious introduction. And I want you to know that I'm honored by the invitation. It's always such a privilege to be in front of a group such as this, people who care about community, people who are involved in their community. So I want to thank you. I want to pay tribute to the League and everything that you represent. Well, my assignment today is to talk about our region and how we're faring and what the pandemic has done to us and where we go from here. So I'm actually going to share my screen. Let me do this, and then let me pull up my slides. And if I've done this correctly, you should be looking at my title slide. So here we go. I would like to begin by reminding you that we live in a remarkable place. Silicon Valley is the most prodigious, most highly productive, most expansive, most disruptive economy that has ever existed in the history of regional economies. And I do not mean that statement to be braggadocious or to set myself up as a booster of our region. I'm actually neither of those things. I'm just letting you know that that is a cold, clinical, rational statement. That is the truth about Silicon Valley. And what's remarkable about it is that we have been doing this for at least 85, even more years. That's a long time in economic history. And by the way, here's a chart that shows you those successive waves over a period of decades. And what's most striking, this is a different way to look at it, what's most striking about our region is that we have seen generations of technology, generations of innovation come and go, and yet we keep reinventing ourselves. Each wave is succeeded or replaced by a new wave. And those waves very often don't resemble each other. In fact, they'll be completely different. They'll have different functional requisites, different economies of scale, different barriers to entry, different product life cycles, different markets that they serve. And yet each one of these waves, as you can see, has been transformative, world-changing, certainly life-changing, and we're still doing it. What's also striking is the breadth of the portfolio. It's not only technology, especially information technology, that gets a lot of the press, but it's also biotechnology and personalized medicine and genomics, and it's also in the energy sphere. Here we are becoming the capital of the electric car industry, the capital of the solar industry, and so it just keeps happening. So anytime we talk about Silicon Valley, we need to understand it in that context. It is a prodigious economy. This is our job picture through the year 2020. And I want to remind you that we experienced in Silicon Valley our longest sustained period of expansion. This is showing it to you. This is showing you that Silicon Valley succumbed after the epic recession, 2008, 2009. We succumbed, as every place did on the planet. And so we experienced job losses that year, but we were already recovering in the year 2010. And by the year 2011, we were job positive. And then we put together 9 successive years of expansion. It totaled to about 850,000 new jobs that were created over that 9-year period. And so I had to put that in perspective for you. Remember, the city of San Francisco is 750,000. And so this chart is telling you that we did the equivalent of taking a city the size of San Francisco and we dropped it onto the Silicon Valley, onto the Bay Area landscape. That's what happened. Now, I'm showing you all of this so that you will understand that that economy never left. The pandemic didn't do anything to undermine that economy that I have just described. In fact, that economy is still here. And for the first part of my presentation, I actually want to review all of that with you. I want to talk about the resilience. I want to talk about the strength and the sheer size and might of the tech economy that is resident here and continues to characterize us. Now, I'm remembering perfectly well when the pandemic set in, people were prepared for a crash of epic proportions, including the tech sector. And now, with retrospect, we're wondering, why were we so scared? Well, I actually remember why we were so scared. The tech economy, let's never forget, is in fact captive to macroeconomic forces. And so if those markets are no longer there, then tech can no longer be fully functioning. And that means that if people aren't buying things, that also means that advertisers aren't buying advertisements. And so the whole thing starts to unravel. Don't ever forget how pegged our tech economy is to advertising and those kinds of things. Also, don't ever forget that for many of these sectors, their margins are extremely thin. When Amazon drops a package on your doorstep, they are actually clearing just pennies on that delivery. And so if those margins are affected, you can imagine an entire sector going belly up. Well, that didn't happen. What happened instead is that we discovered that Silicon Valley and its technology companies turned out to be central, absolutely central to the world economy, and to our ability to weather the sheltering, the quarantine orders, and all of the rest that went with the pandemic. So don't forget, it's Silicon Valley companies that had provided the communications technologies that became vital to working from home. And let me just point out, the technology that we're using right now is a Silicon Valley company. Zoom is a San Jose company. But it's not just the communications, it's also the platforms that allowed for the delivery of goods and services, including our groceries. It's also the platforms that allowed the streaming of entertainment that kept us all sane during the pandemic. But also, do not ever forget that it was also our tech companies, especially in the life sciences, that were on the front edge of the race for the vaccine, doing the genomic sequencing, doing the supercomputing for that sequencing, doing the contact tracing, coming up with the testing and all of the protocols and the massive amounts of data that were associated with that. And so it turns out that sheltering in place is actually really good for the technology economy. It was a market boost for these companies. And as a result, what happened is that our major companies, just take the top 5, Facebook, Apple, Netflix, and Google, they came out of the pandemic with a combined revenue of $1.2 trillion. This is absolutely remarkable. Apple, just to give you one example, Apple has so much cash that it is actually spending $90 billion of its own reserves to buy its own stock. That's the sort of thing that we're talking about. And frankly, the tech companies used the pandemic to get even stronger. They found that they had huge cost savings on plant and equipment and on marketing. And so instead, they invested it in infrastructure, warehouses, cloud computing hubs, and all of the rest. And so I'm just going to reel through a few charts and figures to help you get a better sense of this. Here we are looking at stock market performance. And over the months of the pandemic, we saw that our market cap gained over $5 trillion. Let me remind you, market cap is the value of all of the shares multiplied by the number of shares. And so when the pandemic set in, sure enough, there was a dip, but it didn't last very long. We came roaring back to the tune of 8 trillion. So now Silicon Valley's market cap stands at 11 trillion. It's beating out all of the market indexes, even those that are more heavily weighted toward tech, like NASDAQ. Here's your venture capital picture. We thought that 2020 was amazing as we look at it. It turns out that we had only the second highest year in our history. The highest year ever was 2018. We generated more than 50 billion in venture capital that year. In 2020, we were just slightly below it. $46 billion in venture capital came out of the Bay Area's economy, out of Sand Hill Road, out of San Francisco. It's truly remarkable. Here is the venture capital and how it's distributed. And there's no surprise, it's going to internet companies, and it's also going to healthcare companies and to companies that are in that space, mobile technology, communications technology. So no surprise there. But you should be surprised by this. There's a newly emerging category, during the pandemic, and that's the transportation sector. And so you will see here that the fourth largest category of venture investing is for transportation companies like Waymo, Neuro, and like other autonomous vehicle companies. Also in that category are things like drones, flying cars. This is becoming a newly emerging sector for Silicon Valley as we continue to reinvent ourselves, wave after wave. This is a chart that's showing you that there's an interesting trend with the venture capital. The venture money is actually going into fewer deals. And so we could talk about that, discuss if that's a good thing or not. It used to be that the venture capital would be thinly spread over all kinds of startups that were dotting the Silicon Valley landscape. Now we have a different picture. Actually, most of the venture capital is going into mega deals, and we define those as deals that are more than $100 million. And so huge proportions of it are going into those mega deals. Now, here is a chart that shows you the growth of unicorn companies. And let me remind you what a unicorn is. It's funny. The term was chosen because unicorns are supposed to be these mythical creatures that you would rarely, if ever, encounter. And so they said that a private company that's valued at more than $1 billion would be considered a unicorn. Well, in Silicon Valley, we actually now have 114 unicorns. They're no longer mythical. That's a symbol of our remarkable technological strength, innovative strength. 114 unicorns. In fact, now we're not even talking about unicorns anymore. We're starting to talk about decacorns, and these are private companies that are valued at $10 billion. And Silicon Valley has 8 of those, 8 decacorns. And when you compare both of these charts to the rest of the United States, you can see it's just completely outsized, just completely beyond anything that any other region is posting up. And all of this, remember, during the pandemic. Now, here's your IPO picture. And I'll just summarize this really quickly. This chart is telling you that the pandemic was a banner year for IPOs. We had 24 IPOs come out of Silicon Valley, and they generated $8.6 billion. The IPOs, by the way, are spread across all of this enormous portfolio, everything from healthcare to financial services to consumer staples. Energy is an important segment of this picture, and so on and so forth. Now, I found this fascinating. The average IPO return rate in 2020 was 80%. But for Silicon Valley IPOs, we outstripped the national average. The return rate was 117%. So again, it's just our return rates can in some cases be twice the national average. Let me show you what happened with patents during the pandemic year. It turns out, just like venture capital, it was our second highest total in history. And if you're curious what the raw number is, this chart tells you it's 20,000 patents. Our region generated 20,000 patents over the year 2020, second only to the prior year, 2019. And again, you can see how those patents are distributed across all of these industries and market segments, including some newly emerging ones. So this is all quite amazing. By the way, this chart shows you that of the top 10 patent generating cities in California, most of them, 7 out of the 10, are right here in the Bay Area. And the same is true of the nation. In fact, the nation's largest patent generating city is San Jose, followed closely by these others. Now, commercial development is a sign of the economy's health. And this shows you that commercial development continued. When the pandemic set in, we thought it would all be shut down. And surely it was for a period of time. And then the projects resumed their activity as they introduced protocols, disinfecting procedures, the distancing, and all of the rest. So one question was, would we be able to build? The answer was yes, we did with protocols. But the other more important question was, would the tech companies themselves call off their developments because there's a wild card now. It's not entirely clear if people need or want to be working in conventional offices. Well, we don't actually know the answer to that question yet, but what we do know is that the major tech companies did not scuttle their development projects. In fact, every single one of them are continuing as planned. This, for example, is the Google Downtown West plan, which was approved unanimously by the San Jose City Council. And so this is a plan for mixed-use development in the Diridon area of San Jose, and it is going to add 25,000 Googlers to the mix. And that includes proposals for 5,000 new housing units and so on and so forth. And all of this going forward completely unaffected by the pandemic. So maybe this won't surprise you given everything I've just reviewed. Our state budget was projected to have a significant deficit for all of the reasons that we supposed. What happened instead is that we generated a $75 billion surplus. It's remarkable. And so no surprise, we've seen our governor go dancing up and down the state. He couldn't be in a happier place. Even despite a recall election, he is sitting on top of a $75 billion surplus. And let me explain the major reason. It's because our state budget is pegged to the types of things that I've just described. Stock options, capital gains. And Silicon Valley is, without question, the engine that is driving all of that for our state. So that's your picture. This, by the way, I'll conclude with this chart on the technology side. This shows you what average annual earnings are during the pandemic year when you compare it to the United States. So if you take all of the people, the money that they earn, and you divide it by the number of people, that's what this chart is showing you. And the national average is less than $80,000. In Silicon Valley, that figure is more than $150,000. So we're about double the national average, and that's even during the pandemic. Now, we're going to talk in a minute about how this chart is misleading, grossly misleading. Nevertheless, there it is. It's telling you something, that these average figures are astounding and pretty much off the charts. Okay, well, that's one part of our story, but that's not the only part of the story. And so for the remaining minutes that I have allotted to me, I want to talk about the other side. And this is a grim story from which we are still recovering. But I want to make this clear. The pandemic introduced what we need to understand as an artificial intervention. And it was a cruel one, but it was artificial. And that artificial intervention was to simply close down the in-person segment of our economy. So all of the things that had to happen in person, the travel industry, the retail sector, the restaurants, the shopping, gardening, all of these things that happen in a face-to-face manner. Or let me put it another way. If you have a job that you cannot perform in front of a computer screen in the way that I'm doing right now, then that segment of our economy was shut down. And so that shuttered large segments of Silicon Valley. And so now I want to talk about that. This is the slide that I opened with, and I was telling you how robust our economy is, and sure enough, 9 consecutive years. This is what happens when you introduce an artificial intervention. Our economy lost 445,000 jobs right off the bat. That's for the Bay Area. In Silicon Valley proper, we lost about 150,000 jobs. These are our friends, our neighbors, our relatives, our brothers and sisters. Now, we very quickly gained a lot of those back. In fact, as of last month, we had gained about 225,000 of those jobs back as the economy gradually and incrementally began to reopen. And in Silicon Valley proper, we've gained about 100,000 of those back. Nevertheless, we're going to do a release this afternoon And I haven't seen the final numbers, but I am predicting that your unemployment figure will be in the 4s as of this afternoon. Here's a chart showing you that our unemployment figure shot up to 16%. Then it fell down to about 5.9%. That was as of last month. I think we'll be in the 4s by this afternoon. This chart, however, also doesn't tell you the honest truth. It doesn't tell you the whole picture, because this is unemployment across the entire economy. What it's not telling you is that the tech sector and other segments of the economy actually grew. They didn't experience employment losses, they experienced employment growth. And this chart isn't also showing you that segments of the economy, like the retail sector, experienced unemployment at the rates of 35% and above. And so you really have to become granular. Just in case you're wondering, the tech portion of our economy accounts for 26%. Tech is hard to define, and it suffuses the entire economy. But as you look at this chart, what I guess I'm trying to tell you with this is that there are people out there that are doing tech narrowly defined. They work with electrons. They make those electrons go dance. And that's about 26% of our economy. During the pandemic, that portion of our economy grew by 4 percentage points, whereas the big slice of the pie, what we call community infrastructure, it lost its share of the pie. And so that's the grim story that we're talking about. What's brutal and completely unfair about it is that these jobs, the community infrastructure jobs, also happen to be the lowest paying jobs. As we have learned, if we didn't know already, they're the most noble jobs among us. They're absolutely essential. They are even on the front lines, but they are not as highly compensated as the other segments of the economy. So the people who could least afford to lose their jobs were, in fact, the ones who lost their jobs. So there's a brutal unfairness about what happened during the pandemic. Here's another chart that illustrates that. This just shows you the housing insecurity that set in as a result of the pandemic. And we estimate that 26% of Silicon Valley households are what we call housing insecure. This means that they do not have confidence that they will be able to pay the rent in the coming month, especially when those moratoriums are lifted. It's 40% of households with children. And this inset is telling you that we estimate there are close to 200,000 Silicon Valley households that are at risk of eviction when those eviction moratoria are lifted. Here's your picture on poverty and self-sufficiency. Many people are surprised to learn that about a third of Silicon Valley households live below the poverty line, or to be more technical, live below what I'm calling self-sufficiency. And this is a standard that's defined by academics. But what it means is that in order to get by, these households require some form of assistance, and it's coming from friends, neighbors, faith communities, or from outright government assistance. So 3 out of 10 Silicon Valley households are not defined as sufficient. And then these figures are, they exhibit gross disparities by race. We take no pleasure in reporting these kinds of outcomes, but it is true that our Latinx members and our African American members are by far more housing insecure, less self-sufficient than their counterparts across the other ethnicities. And the pandemic has made that more pronounced. I want to talk for a brief moment about income inequality. This might be the most stark and dramatic chart that I have to show you. And it's probably hard to tell because it's a wonky point cast. But let me explain it this way. We're measuring inequality, income inequality, the gap between the wealthy and the people who are not wealthy. For most of Silicon Valley's history, we were what was characterized by economists as a roughly equal economy. In other words, Silicon Valley was people in those mid-range professions. They were people going to work for Silicon Valley's companies and their earnings. Most of the workforce was in that mid-range segment, with the extremes at the other end. But we were not your classic hourglass economy. We were a roughly equal economy. Now, there are many ways that you can measure it. This is one way that we measure it, and we think it's a pretty effective way, and that's called the Gini coefficient. So just to briefly explain, the Gini coefficient says that it runs on a scale from 0 to 1. So it says that if a coefficient of 1 would mean that one person holds all of the wealth, and a Gini coefficient of 0 says that all of the people hold all of the wealth equally. So the question is, all right, where do you fall on that scale between 0 and 1? And in 1990, you'll see that we were about 37 on that scale, 37, which is considered relatively equal. Okay, since 1990 through the pandemic, we gained 40 points on this scale. The Gini coefficient in Silicon Valley today is above 70, and the pandemic made it even more pronounced. And by the way, you should know that when they apply the Gini coefficient to countries, a coefficient above 5 is considered unstable, politically unstable. Those are considered the conditions that are conditions for revolution, insurrections, and other kinds of upheavals. So that's what we're talking about in Silicon Valley. We are by far the nation's most unequal region. Here's a chart that might dramatize that a little bit. This chart is showing you that 16% of the people in Silicon Valley account for 86% of the wealth. 16% of the people hold 86% of the wealth. The chart is also showing you that the 53% of the people on the bottom of the scale hold 2% of the wealth. Okay, have you got that? 16% command 86% of the wealth, 53% command 2% of the wealth. So that's your picture. I'm going to now tell you the saddest thing of all. And that is this chart. In fact, I'm going to detail it for you. This is showing you that the exposure to the disease and the case count for the disease was not equal across the races and ethnicities in Silicon Valley. In fact, if you were Latinx, your exposure to the disease was 5 times greater than your white counterparts. So that's just really dramatic. Let me dramatize it even more. This is a chart showing you the death rates for the different racial categories. And so this is showing you what it looks like for the Latinx members of our community. And it's telling you that for example, in the age range 40 to 49, this is showing you that there were 8 deaths per 100,000 if you were white. But if you were Hispanic, there were 45 deaths per 100,000. It's just cruelly unequal. And so you might wonder why that is. Well, the reasons are fairly straightforward. We know for a fact that the people that are working on the front lines and that are populating the in-person economy are disproportionately Latinx. We know this. We also know that those households have all of the conditions that are ripe for contracting the disease. It means that they're living in high occupancy households where there is a higher likelihood that one member of the household has been exposed to the disease, and there are more persons per household than there are bedrooms. And so for all of these reasons, we see a population where we're completely out of whack. The exposure to the disease has been grossly unequal and unfair to the Latinx members of our community. Here, I want to put it in just very straightforward terms. Are Hispanic residents who are more likely than white Americans to have jobs that cannot be done remotely, and by the way, do not provide paid sick leave, right? These residents are 3 times as likely as our white residents to be hospitalized with the disease, and more than twice as likely to die of it. And remember, this chart is showing you that they're dying at younger ages. And also remember that it is that means that these casualties are probably the people who were the income winners and who had households, family members who were reliant upon them, unlike the white members of society who are dying at a later age and probably no longer have dependents. So I'm trying to help you understand the viciousness of this disease and the toll, the devastating toll that it took on this portion of our community and of our society. Well, let's see. I need to stop fairly quickly because I want to allow plenty of time for questions. So let me just quickly say that despite everything I've told you, our region has also shown itself to be generous, deep-hearted. In almost no time whatsoever, we generated $94 million in funds that were deployed immediately for food, for shelter, and basic needs. We took very aggressive approaches to people who are at risk of homelessness, and our corporate sector was extremely generous, coming forward with millions and millions of dollars for those kinds of projects. Many of them were highly innovative. I'm talking about Room Key, Project Home Key. And so one of the wonderful things that is coming out of the pandemic is a significant commitment on the part of our leaders, our civic leaders, but also our business leaders, to build back, but not only to recover, but to build back better and to address issues like the ones that I've just summarized, to see that there are better paths to economic advancement, that there are better opportunities for inclusivity and diversity in our workforce. So those things are coming. If you're not aware, these three companies have forwarded $4.5 billion for housing projects. All of this coming out of the pandemic. Okay, the last thing I want to just hit on before we open it up for questions is this question: are people leaving California? Are people leaving Silicon Valley? Let me just answer really quickly. People want to know if, because of the pandemic, there's been flight out of our region. And it is true, we aren't seeing people move out of the region, but we are seeing them leave temporarily for the duration of the pandemic because they now have the opportunity to work remotely. And so they were trying to get out from under the high housing prices. And so that happened. That's been happening. But by the way, we've been experiencing outward migration for many years running, and it was happening prior to the pandemic. So just so you know, the percentage of Americans that moved in 2020 was 11%. You might think that's a lot, but it's actually only 1.5 percentage points higher than a normal year, 2018, for example. So in terms of flight, we're not yet seeing it in our region. And when we compare our region to other regions, we don't even rank in the top 5. San Francisco made the 5th position. San Jose didn't even make the top 10. And so we're not seeing the outward migration in the ways that you might have thought, because there's been a lot of talk about this. And where we do see people leaving Silicon Valley proper, it's interesting that most of it isn't leaving the Bay Area. It's just going to the far-flung portions of the Bay Area, to Napa, Solana, Contra Costa, where the housing is more affordable. Okay, and then here's the last question. I can go into all of this more in more depth if you're interested. The question is, are we losing companies? And actually, we're not. We've lost 3 companies. And from where we sit, we don't want to say that 3 is a trend. We think that each one of these are unique circumstances, and for a fact, we're still seeing more companies coming to Silicon Valley than we see leaving, and we don't see any evidence yet that that trend will be reversing. Okay, folks, I just want to remind you that all of the data that I've shared today is community property. We maintain a website. This is it, SiliconValleyIndicators.org, and you can go there, and we want you to go there, and you can utilize this dashboard, and you can pull up all of this data, including hundreds more indicators, which you can use interactively for your purposes. We want this to be in your hands. We want you to be sharing it with your friends. It is yours, and it is our pleasure to provide it, as it has been my pleasure to speak with you today. So there you have it. I will now turn it over to you, Madam President, and also Barbara. It's so nice to see you, Barbara, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you so much, Russell. It was very thorough and a fascinating look at what's happening in our valley. I will have to say that the word profiteering entered my head a couple of times. Oh, well, but we're very happy to take questions. We have a few questions that were given ahead of time, and Barbara is going to be asking them. Again, if you want to enter your questions into chat, or if you would like to ask your own question, click on the little raised hand symbol. Thank you very much. Barbara.
It's great to see you too, Russ. This is fun. I wish it were in person.
Me too.
Let's just take off on Carol's comment about profiteering. When you began the presentation, we were talking a lot about the amount of money the companies made, and we ended with them being very charitable and really perhaps elevating their overall concern permanently about the disparities. Is the, even though it's a huge amount of money, is the amount of money that they have contributed to help people commensurate with the increase in profits? How does that shake out?
Yep. Well, there are lots of things I might say. But let's just start with the basic facts. So I showed you that figure, $4.5 billion that 3 companies have made available. Other companies are also investing in housing when they don't have to. Other companies are investing in other things. Cisco, for example, came forward with 50 million. Then they came forward with millions more after that when the pandemic set in. All of that going to Destination Home and their efforts for homelessness. The point is, we could talk for a very long time about how the tech companies are investing millions upon millions of dollars into this community to address some of these really thorny and difficult problems. That's a fact. And their generosity in our region compares extremely favorably to companies in any other region. So those are facts. Now, there are a lot of people that say, well, the company should be doing more. They should be doing far more than that because they have so much money. Now, as soon as you pose that question or venture that opinion, I just need to tell you that that's where I actually need to exit the conversation. What I'm doing here is I'm just telling you the facts. That's my role. I'm the president of the Silicon Valley Institute for Regional Studies, and our role is just to report the numbers. You're welcome to speculate on what they mean and to make judgment decisions about who should do what and who should do this and that. If you would like my own personal opinion, I'm happy to share it with you, but I want to be very clear. It's just my personal opinion, not the opinion of our institute. Our institute doesn't have opinions. We're just here to tell you the facts. But this is also a fact. Don't ever forget this fact. Companies exist for one reason. They exist to return value to their shareholders. That is the only reason that they exist. You can debate that, you can lament that, you can wish that it were different, but that is a fact. Companies only exist to return value to their shareholders. So these companies have chosen electively to penalize their shareholders significantly and to put money into the community when it's not expected and when it's when they're under no obligation to do so. That's significant. Now, the other really interesting question is, well, it's all their fault. They caused this problem, right? They're the ones that have caused our traffic problems and our high housing prices, and so they need to take responsibility for these problems. I actually think that's a harsh judgment, a very harsh judgment. So we can have that debate, and it's a very interesting debate. It will be a very lively one. Anyway, as we have that debate, I think those are the facts. Those are the things those are the essential things that we must remember as we have this discussion. Finally, let me say this. It is true that $4.5 billion, believe it or not, doesn't go very far. We did the arithmetic. It builds about 10,000 housing units, 10,000. But we estimate that Silicon Valley is short, the housing shortage in Silicon Valley is 170,000 units. So that $4.5 billion is a drop in the bucket. Okay, Barbara.
Okay, let's just look at one more way the tech economy perhaps could help this situation, and that is if it paid more, if it, for instance, had its maintenance and security staff and so on, if those folks were paid a higher wage, perhaps as employees of the company, rather than contracted out and making often minimum wage for what is. Could companies, is there any kind of mandate for companies to do that? I realize it's less money for shareholders.
Yes.
But when does the societal need trump that? Go ahead.
Right. So again, super interesting and important philosophical questions. Now, there is a trend that is becoming a movement, and that trend is for the workforce itself, the workforce of these tech companies to become highly active on these questions. Tech companies are starting to unionize. We've never seen that. And tech companies are starting to speak out. I mean, their workforce people are organizing and becoming outspoken on these life issues and fairness issues. So I believe that you're going to see this trend intensify and increase. Because it's already happening. So that's one thing. The second thing is that we are seeing the tech companies themselves, of their own volition, develop consciences. They're becoming very socially conscious of these issues. And so there's been quite a lot of conversions from people on contracts over to salaried positions. We don't have data on this, so I can't tell you the extent of it. Nor are the tech companies sharing the data. They're just doing it quietly. But during the pandemic, actually, most of the major tech companies just kept everybody in place, even though they weren't showing up to work. They didn't lay them off. They kept paying their salaries. They kept paying the contracts. So that's significant, even though I can't tell you the numbers because they're not reported and they're not trumpeting them. So that also tells you something about it. But that won't solve the entire thing. And you can't expect companies to self-police themselves, nor should they be expected to have a conscience, because remember, that's not why they were created. So if you really want to address the philosophical issues, that's where the heavy hand of government comes in, as it should, right? That is the role of society and its institutions to play. And here too, we're seeing this happen. We're seeing this appetite increase, and we're seeing tremendous activity in state capital and in the national capital as these companies come under scrutiny, not only for their practices, but for their products and for the concentration of their power and influence. And so I fully expect that there will be antitrust legislation, but also workplace legislation addressing the salary and the contract issue. I think that's coming probably sooner than later.
And how do you personally feel about that?
I think it's appropriate, highly appropriate. I believe that one of the best things to come out of the pandemic is that our frontline people doing the most noble jobs in society emerge now with newfound standing and stature, and also, I think, new bargaining power. Let's face it, we all know this, minimum wage is not a living wage. It is not. It's not a living wage. And I think we have to be talking about living wage, and that conversation has now shifted.
And should that be a broader conversation, or should it be continue as city by city, the way it seems to be happening now?
I believe it has to be a broader conversation. I think it makes no sense to do it on a city by city basis. I think this is why we have state and federal governments.
A good question from Roma Dawson. Why are tech companies so opposed to even a small increase in the corporate tax, say even just to restore 1980s levels?
I mean, no disrespect, but you would have to ask them. Ask the tech companies that question. And I don't mean to be dismissive about it, but I haven't met anybody that enjoys having their taxes raised. I've never met that person. All of us, including all of us on this call, are famously anti-tax. America was founded in an outburst of anti-tax sentiment. That's who we are. That's our DNA. So I'm not sure we should hold tech companies to a higher standard. But clearly there's a role for taxation. And let me also, I'm mindful that I'm sounding like a real apologist today for tech companies. I didn't actually mean to go there. I'm just trying to be objective about this. But if we're objectively summarizing the role that tech companies have played, don't ever forget that they have led the tax measures. They are the ones that have electively come forward and elected to lead campaigns for Measure A and Measure B and all of these expansions that have been for transportation improvements, health improvements, and a variety of other things. So I don't think Silicon Valley companies are adverse to tax, but I think they want to be at the table and they want to do it in the way that makes the most sense. They certainly want to have a voice. And I think to that, I say fair enough.
Yeah, I guess there's a little difference. I mean, leading the tax measures for transportation, and I've pretty much never met a tax measure I didn't like as a voter. I mean, I'm willing to pay for better transportation, to protect open space and so on.
Yeah.
And for healthcare.
Right.
But a lot of those measures are primarily on people, and there are sales taxes that are actually, not social.
This is true. This is true.
So I guess that's just me commenting. If you have anything else to say about that, I mean, the corporate tax would be a broader tax and would allow government to deal with issues on a broader scale.
Yep. And that's appropriate. And we should be having those conversations. And in fact, I think we are having those conversations. I think it's understandable when tech companies feel singled out. And recent efforts in Mountain View, others, to put a per head tax on corporations within their city boundaries. That's it. That's a case of that. That's singling them out. And it's doing it in a way that is pretty straightforward scapegoating. It's saying, you guys are a problem. We're actually not glad that you're here. And I get it. I understand why they might feel that way, but I also understand why you would feel scapegoated. Because remember, when you create a job is the best social program that has ever been invented.
Right.
So
no, I agree. I think most of us would agree that discouraging job creation probably isn't a rational thing to do.
Probably.
Pardon?
Yeah, I agree with you. Probably not.
Would our society work better in the long run if government raised taxes on the wealthy? And this, I think the intent of the question is wealthy individuals and not corporate tax rates.
Yes.
And again, let me ask it personally. Do you think that should happen?
Yeah. Again, we're just talking about personal opinion. To me, it makes perfect sense. Why wouldn't you do that? I've seen the figures. They're provocative. They're incredibly provocative. You could take the 50 richest people in the United States. You could claim merely 2% of their income, and it would solve most of our social problems. It's really that dramatic, and it's really that simple. So this could be done with relatively little amounts of pain. So yes, it makes sense. It would make sense, I think, to anybody that looks at the thing rationally. Okay, so that's one observation. But the other observation is to say that, in fact, we are doing that. That's that conversation is totally happening, and I think we can expect in a reasonable amount of time, revised income tax structures in our nation that are graduated upward, and you'll see the wealthiest among us paying their share.
Question on the eternal jobs, housing balance for cities, and San Jose still has its problem and still has the higher poverty rates per individual than I believe any city except perhaps Gilroy. Is this still something we can deal with? Is there any way to share revenue so that a Palo Alto can help meet the housing shortage, if not in Palo Alto, at least someplace else? I realize every city should bear its own responsibility, but is there anything you think they should do?
Well, I want to thank everybody for asking such important questions and such provocative questions. These are really provocative questions, and they do get down to philosophy. The philosophy at the root of this question is, should we be doing things on a city scale, or should we be doing it at a larger scale? Now, I am a regionalist in my bones. I think that it makes no sense for the Bay Area to be planning its destiny at the city level. We are 101 cities. We are 9 counties. And guess what you get when we do it the city way? You get this. This is what you get. You get 6 different rail systems. They're all orthogonal. They don't meet up. You get these gross disparities between communities, and you get the nation's highest housing prices. That's what you get. But you can't solve it. It simply cannot be solved. If it could be solved in this way, we would have the solution, because everybody would like to see that solution. So the only way you fix problems that are as deeply rooted as this is by creating different institutions. And in my view, those institutions should be regional. We should have a regional government that actually has power and authority to make decisions, including taxation decisions. And that is the only way that you can get the kind of revenue sharing that you just described, Barbara. So yes, I'm in favor of it. The only way you can get it is by a popular vote, which would mean a massive social movement that placed something on the ballot, or to have it superimposed upon us by the state legislature. That approach has been tried. It has failed dramatically. And so if you really want to have the thing that you described, then there is going to have to be a grassroots effort to place it on the ballot in all 9 counties. And if that happens, I will be in favor of it, and so would my organization.
Well, thank you. How are we for time, Carol? Shall we keep going a bit, or we are nearing, I believe, 1 o'clock?
Yeah, we're getting close to 1 o'clock. So if we could start to wrap up, and if there are more questions, I do see another one from Roma that just came in, wondering about recommendations for improvements to MTC or ABAG from a regional perspective.
Yeah, well, we can close with that. MTC is a fantastic agency. It's actually the best of its kind. I would take their people, their leadership. I would take them over any metropolitan planning organization across the country. I'm not critical of MTC nor of ABAG. But here's what you have to understand. Those institutions are limited. They are structurally limited. They actually don't have the power to make rational decisions. All they have the power to do is route funds that they receive from the federal government. For the most part, they have to route them by formula. They are not a transportation planning agency. They don't do our transportation planning. They don't have the authority, for example, to collapse BART and Caltrain into one mega agency serving our region. They don't have those powers and authorities. I actually think they should. So we would be in favor of that. Meanwhile, we see them doing everything they can, which is they have integrated their staff. They've executed a functional merger. I'd like to see them integrate their boards as well. And then institutionally, I think it would be really important for those boards to be elected, not appointed. Right now they're appointed. So all of the people that are sitting on those boards, didn't run for those seats. They were not subjected to democratic review. They did not run on a transportation platform that we all got to opine upon. In fact, they don't have transportation expertise. They gain it in the course of their service, but they don't have it. They were elected just to represent their neighborhood on their city council. And so there's a better way to do this, a much better way to be doing this. And I hope that day arrives. I hope I live long enough to see it.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Russell, for this wonderful and important information that we've got. It is troubling, and I think all of us are going to be thinking about this for quite a while. And thank you very much, Barbara, for asking the questions and being our moderator today. So I want all of you to stay tuned we've been doing this Lunch with League every third Thursday. And next month, we are thinking of, we have not made the final plans yet, but rather than having a speaker, we are thinking about having an outdoor picnic in a park or someplace like that, where we can have lunch, all get together and be physically together rather than over Zoom. So I want to thank all of you for joining us today. And let's hope that we can get together in person again. And